Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
How are y'all doing?
I'm good. Dragging along because I haven't had coffee yet.
Ooh, it's almost 11 o'clock and you haven't had coffee. Wow.
Yeah, I had to come in and write my youth group, so I was working on that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're recording later than we usually do. We're usually earlier than this.
Yeah. Coffee Talk was really excitable today. And so, they had great questions. And so it was really good. And no one wanted to get offline. And it was kind of a party. They had a lot to say. And we didn't really want to shut that conversation down. So, yeah.
Coffee Talk is one of my favorite things. I love that we have so many folks who come to that and participate. That's a really good, one of my favorite parts of the week.
Well, yeah, speaking of education opportunities, good segue. We have some educational opportunities going on at St. Matthew's right now, and some educational opportunities coming up that are tied to like two of the biggest things we talk about around here. Baptism. Yeah, baptism and communion. We have baptismal instruction happening, and we have communion enrichment coming up. So maybe if y'all want to kick it off, what do we do for baptismal instruction? Like, who's invited, who's a part of it? What do we talk about with baptismal instruction?
Yeah, so baptismal instruction is really for anyone in the congregation that's seeking baptism. So if we have unbaptized children, infants, youth, adults, elderly, anybody that's seeking kind of that sacrament, we have classes and kind of they go through that. And so we have, our structure is 3 classes, roughly about 30 minutes tops, and we cover a myriad of topics. I know my last one on the 14th is going to be centered on kind of community life and engagement here at St. Matthew's, and what this community has done for so many. So that's one where we pull in some of the other members that can kind of speak to what St. Matthew's means to them and to their children, and how important it was for them to have this place in this community as they raise their children.
Yeah. We're kind of going backwards, but mine's the second session, and we look at the baptismal liturgy itself. We look at what's actually done in the worship service, because there's some promises that are made and things that we say and do in worship that mean a lot, and we take time to talk about it, so it's not just going through it in the moment of the baptismal service, but talking about what all it means and why it all matters, what we do and say when we have this baptismal liturgy happening in worship. So, and then you have the first one, Pastor Eric.
I do the first one, but the first one is a discussion of this little book by Daniel Erlander, and it's called Let the Children Come, and it's a little brief book about what is baptism, the history of baptism, but what does it mean to be baptized? It's not, and one of the, I think, most important takeaways is it's not just that moment that people often think about, where the moment of the baptism, the important part comes after, is how you live out your life as a child of God claimed to baptismal waters. It's a really good little book.
Ooh.
Yeah. And we want it to be an invitation for folks to see the gifts of baptism and how that is an entrance into the life of the church.
Mm-hmm. So just, thinking about this, if someone wanted to come, maybe they aren't getting baptized or having a child baptized, but say if someone wanted to come and just sit in and get a refresher course, you think they could do that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned the other opportunity we have coming up. It's on Wednesday, November 17th, ahead of our last WAM. It's going to be at 5 p.m., starting at 5 p.m., and it's communion enrichment. And this class comes up usually whenever families come to me and say, hey, I'm interested in my kid taking communion. And it's interesting, we call it communion enrichment and not first communion, because here at St. Matt's with Pastor Eric and I, you don't have to have the class to take communion, but some families prefer that kids learn about communion before they take communion for the first time. And so For some families, this is a, class before their child has communion. And then for some other families, their child has been taking communion and then they want to go back, and now's the time that they want to have an opportunity for their child to ask questions or learn more. So the communion enrichment is meant to sort of cover a lot of different bases based on, families' preferences. And so usually I'll do a session around the fall and maybe around the spring, kind of around WHAM times, whenever families come to me and say they're interested. And then once we publish the date, then anyone's invited to have communion enrichment and learn more. And the way this class is set up is we also use a Daniel Erlander book called A Place at the Table. And it talks about communion and what communion uses and what is a sacrament and where does communion come from and how does communion look in different places. And we talk about that book a bit. And then we do a very hands-on part that I think the kids who really get into this really enjoy. And that is that the kids make communion bread, homemade communion bread. And the idea is to really talk about hands-on. We take ordinary things, ordinary ingredients, make a loaf of bread, and that we use it for something really, really special where Jesus shows up. And that that bread then gets served at WHAM that night for WHAM communions. That's why we like to have it on WHAM nights, is because that's what ends up getting served for communion. And so we're excited to bring that back. And, if you just want to come and hear more about communion or think more about communion and watch or bake bread, you're invited too, people of all ages. I aim towards the kids, but anyone's invited to join in.
Awesome. That sounds fun. Maybe I'll go.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. So I guess our last question, as we think about, we've seen a lot of baptisms. I don't remember my own baptism, but I've seen a lot of baptisms. And I remember the first time I had communion, and I've seen a lot of communion. Do y'all have any interesting or funny memories around baptism or communion?
Yeah, we growing up at my church, first communion, there was it was almost like there was more. Yeah, there was like third graders went through first communion, so we had those classes, and it kind of cultivated it, like ended with all of us up on the chancel doing our first communion before the congregation. Mm-hmm. And the greatest part of watching it, not so much while you were doing it, was you're watching the kid's face when they taste the wine for like the second or third time, because usually there was some kind of like some kind of funny face made. I know I made one and my parents laughed at me, but it's just funny.
I remember around one of the kind of a carryover is with my first communion group. We also made bread, but we didn't have near as good a recipe. And it was really emphasis on like it had to be unleavened bread. And then on top of that, like we weren't really good bakers, my group. And so the bread that we had, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think it might have been better if we had just had wafers. It was just not good. And you could tell everyone in the congregation, we had it on Maundy, Thursday, everyone in the congregation coming up to have communion, like you could tell by their faces, they didn't enjoy it, but they were also trying not to hurt the kids' feelings. So it just wasn't, it was really awkward that they were trying to make it through. It's very chewy, very, I don't know.
No.
Yeah. But Jesus still showed up. Even in that loaf, Jesus still showed up. It just,
Mine, I think, would have to do with baptism. And it's one that just stands out. It's one that I often recall when I think of baptisms. I was baptizing a 5-year-old, and he was standing up. I think maybe we had a stool there because he was standing up and he could look into the font. And I encouraged him to put his hand in. And when I put the water on him, he he laughed, he giggled, and it was the best laugh. And he was so close enough to the microphone that it picked up his laugh, and it echoed through the church, and the congregation heard it too. And that's what a baptism should be about. It's a laughter moment. It's a happy moment. It's not solemn. It's a moment of welcome into this new community of promise and enrichment and all of this. And I still can hear that laugh today. It was wonderful.
Cool. Well, we've got a lot coming up too. We've got Christ the King Sunday. We've got Thanksgiving coming up soon. And then before you know it, we'll be like into our favorite season of Advent. So
Advent.
I do love some Advent.
Yeah. Everything's gonna be good. That'd be great. So all right. Well, thanks, guys.
Good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Y'all
you.
have a great week.
Good.
All right.
Be well, everyone.
Bye now.
Toodle.